Shalom, shalom, family. I'm just gonna start off. Just got something I want to talk about real fast. It's a fast little thing. I'm thinking maybe it should be fast. All right, just make sure that cord is in. All right. So I just want to know something. So let me open up a note real fast. All right. So this is a thing. This is a thing about truth. When you study history and you study, you start to realize something, right? You start to realize what's going on, right? You start to realize the world that we're living in and the actual understanding of it. And what's interesting is the biblical narrative told the truth, and everything else is starting to reflect. One of the best evidences right now in time is genetics. I think it's one of the best evidences, not the only, but one of the best evidences. Um, Something just came out that I want to talk about real fast, and I think it's really interesting and important to understand about human history. It has to do with the mind too, about how people think. Things like this, where they talk about, Native Americans as isolated people that never been in history. They're like they never been like history of the line or stuff like that. They just been like kind of, because you get a lot of ideas of a type of native people who's like separate. Like all of a sudden, random or new people pop up. But it's very interesting when you study the history of this area and you get a little understanding. Let me actually make sure I point out something. So when we looked at all these papers with all the evidences, like as we see here, right? You can see early within America, right? Very interesting stuff. Americans by ancestors, the Native Americans, has been difficult to tease apart from. Basically, to see all the basically what it's talking about, right? When it's saying from analyzing what this little paper that came out. Let me just talk about what's on it. Not fine about it. And I'm gonna talk about something real fast because kind of interesting. All right, so this was just came out just today. Is a lot of papers that's talking about it. Right, a lot of different places talking about it. There's a lot of papers on it. But I'm gonna talk about why it's kind of interesting. Right, there's a lot of different things to talk about it. Random places or other. It's talk about a paper. Talk about a paper that just came out. Right, but it's kind of interesting. It's interesting. Let me just read the title. So DNA from ancient population in northern China suggests Native Americans East Asian roots. Now, that's interesting because we had obviously data design and what were the CF groups. And it's interesting how I was saying that, how all the way areas of Native America, these ones are the same ones as the ones over here. So that means that even though that lineage reaches all the way to another side of the world, it's all the same. It's not a new people. It's not a separate people. It's not something that's separate from the book. The book has a perfect understanding of how evidence is pointing the same thing. How DNA from one side of the world originated on one side of the world that would be all together of one human race, dispersing from one region. So that's very important. But the only thing is, I already pointed out these years. I pointed out how these years are, and it's important to know that these years are exaggerated. So Very, very important. So obviously, this is talk about like ice age, younger Dryas, transition of that time frame. So very, very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting. It what this paper really does, it really ties together what many people already suspected, that genetics has a key role with history. It has a key role with history. What it does, it fills in blanks that paper documents can't fill in. It fills in that, but obviously to a very careful point. Very, very, very careful point. You gotta be very, very careful on these things, right? Go about it very carefully. But it's a real paper. It just came out and was talking about these things on what was happening, pretty much. A couple different places that's talking about it. It's kind of interesting. It's one of those things that I think is definitely interesting and definitely important to mention, that people from one side of the world are all connected by one node, right? People all side of the world from this side, all the way over here, are genetically to people over here. So the whole what is important is we can isolate them to three ultimate nodes, right? We can isolate them to three ultimate nodes, and if you look at the way that they root on an unrooted chart, every single person today is from these three ultimate nodes. Well, I say every man is from these three ultimate nodes, right? And then you kind of got the same implication. You can kind of get an understanding with the women, the same kind of thing. But it's interesting how these populations, they're not they're not coming from some random place, right? And if you think about it, right, the world has an idea of illustrated out of Africa idea, right? They say they start over here, they all branched out, right? But what's really interesting about it all is that the oldest lines that we ever found in this area over here. That's where the most oldest lines are. And it makes sense because if you notice, they would have got off the arc out here, right in the center of this area here, right? If they got off right in this area over here and they started to really develop a lot, it mentions that they had went into what is called the mountains and the plains. So they went into the mountains and the plains. So the plains would be close to Sinar because we know they after a while they called them to Sinar. So you can imagine things getting filled early. But I already pointed this out that when the people got off, right? Ham, Shem, Japheth's sons, right? They had multiple sons, and their sons had sons, and their sons and their sons had sons. And quickly, as we know, even by the generation of Cain, we know Noah had Cain, but we know that children of groups had settled in these areas early. They going across these lands, going over here, and there seems early on there was different ways of travel, right? There was a bridge here, right? There was a bridge here, right in this little area that connected all these. That was a bridge a long time ago. We know because the algae, right? We got evidence of the algae. We got evidence of the algae that makes a big difference. And this is important. This is kind of interesting because I've been trying to do a lot of understanding on the ancient Americas, like what was going on in the ancient Americas. There's a lot of interesting things to know about the ancient lands of America. Um, that even has connections to overseas. That you'll be surprised actually came to these ancient lands a long time ago, right? We think of stuff like the Portuguese going overseas and other groups going overseas, but you'll be surprised how early groups overseas seen on the other side of the world. But you can see they already have evidence a long time ago of lines going over, and they also had an idea. A lot of people call it I forget how you say it, a Bengian migration idea. Like it's like an idea. So they're trying to connect two continents, but a lot of times they'll separate these groups. They'll put a line here and say, no, these groups are separated. These groups are not the same groups as those groups a lot of times. But they've been working at trying to connect that these groups actually migrated over there. And that's something that's important because it gives full understanding to what we're seeing in the picture of creation, right? Anyone who's studied this, they're like, oh yeah, of course. But the problem is that a lot of times it's conclusions, but it's no actual full genetic connections, right? And that's why when you're looking at the SNPs and everything, and they're connected by the SNPs, and we're looking at the ancient how those ancient lands were, and they had these little land bridges where they was able to go over and stuff. And we know that there was some that actually had went over. They went over very, very, very recent, very soon, very, very early. So that's why I was looking into it, and it makes perfect sense for the certain lineages that go over the Q lineages and the C lineages, right? The C lineage is actually older, right? You can find apparently some C lineages that might be older than the Q lineages, but I wonder is that only in SNPs and then in fossils? Because in the fossils I've seen, I haven't really seen an ancient C fossil, but I've seen some ancient Qs, but I haven't seen any C fossils. But again, like I said before, these years are subjective. But what's interesting is that we do know. That's what's interesting is that we do know that the lines from one side reaches over from the other side because there's no one new under the sun. There's no one new under the sun. There's no one new under the sun. And this was what we found too. We found that these Q groups had these connections, right? These ancient connections in these ancient lands. So we knew that they had connections over here. They're all of one family, the yellow, right there. So that's very, very, very important. Very, very interesting. So I just wanted to show that real fast. I just want to show that because I just thought that was interesting because it's really bringing obviously an understanding to what we're seeing with these things and everything. Obviously, this is connecting a modern human, as they're saying, right? It says ancient DNA techniques is a really powerful tool, right? Sue says it tells us quite uh, basically definitively that the red deer tree people were modern humans, right? So that's obviously modern humans when they talk about modern humans who they are. Obviously, there's gonna be people, right? That's important. So we know that without a doubt. So you can see indeed. So this is definitely something to note on because we're not of said like Neanderthals and stuff like that, but we're noting like ancient humans. But again, it goes on and says we're modern humans instead of Arctic species such as obviously Neanderthals and Denisovans, despite their unusual right. Talk about their how their features look. So that's kind of important because a lot of times they judge bones by their looks, how the bone looks. Does it look like a Neanderthal? It might look like a Neanderthal. But then what if you pull some genetics from it as a modern human, right? Because there's a lot of different bone structures, right? Someone can have a mutation or something. Someone can have biological disorder or this thing or that thing, right? There's so many different elements that can change the way someone looks. It could be they wore a helmet too long or something. It's different things that can change the way that your head and your skull is shaped, right? Someone can have it formed at a young youth in a certain way. So there's a lot of different ways, but they do confirm that is a modern human that's going from one side to the other, and then they go and talk about the Bering Strait between the continents of Asia and North America, and became the first people to arrive at a new world. So they left from China and Japan, right? So they know that these people had left very early on, going from the lands, basically, obviously from the centers of basically we'll say like the Middle East around that area, because we know this line was originally around the areas of Spain. So it really shot out. It really took a lot of areas really fast, really quickly. So it really, really, really moved very quickly, I would say, from one side of the world to another. So I don't know what was the rush that they were migrating like that, but they surely were. It probably was because as things were starting to build up with a lot of people, they started to fight, and fighting caused people to really migrate really quickly, and that's what we're actually noticing throughout pretty much all of history, that there's people that all of a sudden start fighting, especially when we start getting about this time frame. So this is all. They obviously you gotta be careful, like I said, on these dating things, right? This is just going to be subjective to what their carbon dating is showing. But always remember that when we're doing these things, we already know we took this to the brim and took it all the way to show that you can't 100% trust these dates. But you can get a good understanding on which ones are older, right? Which ones are older. All right. So that's just interesting that is meeting about in that said Paleolithic time frame, right? Transitioning to the Mesolithic, and that's going to give that will be your earliest movements of said humans, right? And that's going to be interesting because it basically tells us, you know, exactly what we're seeing, exactly what we were plotted down when we was looking at the movements of peoples, that we see peoples are all connected, but ultimately connected to the Middle East area, right? About the areas where we see Mount Judy, the mountains of Ararat, right? Very, very important that we notice that is everything that we're seeing is in a harmonic understanding of creation, his creation, right? There's been many that we know the Israelites when they root the biblical narrative. We know it was after the Exodus. Now we understand that that's in the Iron Age, right? There's many history that was before them. None of them were as accurate as when the Most High decided to choose this people to illustrate His word. There's no replica or nothing that, in fact, the way we know that the word of God is true is because the historians and scholars who study the Sumerian history, ancient history of all the ancient civilizations, they don't worship their gods. A lot of times they don't go around evangelizing their gods. Their gods don't plead for them. Their gods are not having a large sum of people saying this is the God. But those who study the history of the biblical narrative as understands how it accurately depicts the creation also believe that he is God. That's important to understand that there's a difference between the world's stories or man-made stories and what is inspired by God, right? Because what's inspired will show itself to be inspired. That's the thing about truth and prophecy, right? To speak it and it comes to pass. To tell a thing of old and surely it's true, right? And that's what we're seeing. I want to show you a little video just of this. I'll end it with this summary. Let me play. So you caught that first part of me. Let me just point out. Let me make sure I read it. So DNA from ancient population, we just talked about this, in southern China suggests Native Americans East Asian roots. So if you, and I've seen this many times where they'll say they don't come from there and these things like that. But this is important to understand that this is confirmed that that there's been multiple different studies, but this is kind of like a yes, indeed. Like there's no doubt, because this is going to be like an ultimate route that we're looking at for a lot of these lineages. So they connect this line and confirm that this line is connecting the lines that go and become what is called Native American, or what they call Native American now, right? The natives of the lands of ancient America, right? So very interesting. So for the first time, researchers successfully sequenced the genome of ancient human. So for the first time, researchers successfully sequenced the genome of ancient human fossils from the late Paleocene in southern China. And remember, we confirmed that they were modern humans, right? So you can see, like the data says, right? As of today, which is July 14, suggests that the mysterious, basically humanoid, right, belong to a extinct mitochondria branch of modern humans. So that's very deep. That's very, very deep because it makes a node, an ultimate node, where families are going to branch off from that node, right? This is really on time and very interesting because this is what I wanted to go over is this type of information because there's plenty of information on ancient humans that pop up in the lands of America about that same-ish time-ish, very, very, very early, and some earlier ones. They get very, very early, and there's some very early ones. For example, here's one that might be actually a little earlier than this one. But this is what it talks about: early human dispersals within the Americas. And that's that paper we just clicked on when other things. But out the connections of ancient lineages and everything in certain territory, right? So we get a couple different connections and everything of certain ties connecting. It's connecting these parts of the land. But great, so they were first connecting then in this land. So they knew that, and that's what we knew too, that you can note on here all the ones. Over here, all the ones. You got one here, right? That's gonna be very important. Note that one right here, right? These two ones. And that's what was an important connection. But then we get our twos. You see a two here, and then a two here, and a two here, and here, and here. So it's really connecting this land. This land has a lot of connections very early on. This land has a lot of connections very early on. A lot of grabbing of connections. So that's what they was noticing, that a lot of connection, a lot of lineages, a lot of fossils show that they had ancient connections. They had ancient connections that go way back. So they were trying to connect what's over, because now they connected up to here, and they did pretty much a lot of places in China. They needed to connect those nodes and just get a solid confirmation that these lines are indeed all connected. Not that there's some random popping up of some random group of genetics. We don't live in an alphabet soup of genetics in the world. We live in a harmonic growth of human beings that basically exists from a set order, right? So that's what's important when we look at these things. Very, very important with these. So I just wanted to talk about that. So it's a short little thing. So end it with that, family. Turn that off. All right. And that's what we was talking about when we was talking these things. As you can see, is that paper right there, right? So you can see what's going on here. The same little thing that we were just talking about of those ones in those. I'll go to the little picture just to uh, real fast. It loads in right there. So you can see, and we see the genetic plotted down. So you can see that mtDNA there. So that's interesting. B2, right? Actually, was B2, haplogroup B2, but this one said around 12 63 to 1380, right? I'm just thinking if there's any history that I know in that time. Not really. I don't think I really looked into the history of that exact pinpoint time frame in America, but I'm sure there's something interesting about it. But this is definitely a interesting one. I just wanted to point that out because I did that just reminded me that there was a brother who said his mtDNA was B2. So I thought that was interesting. So it's a kind of like a ancient Indo-European lineage that actually moved over here and became ancient America lineage, right? Or this ancient land, right? Before it had the name it had today. So ancient Americas, you would say today. It's ancient Americas that would be settled. So very interesting, very, very interesting. So I thought this paper was interesting. Let me finish this little video. Obviously, from the mtDNA that might have contributed to the origin of Native Americans. So nice, very nice. And they just talk about some things that they found there and everything. So it's just what it is. What it is it seals the deal for sure. Like it really seals the deal of how these lines are connected. Right. That's what it is. That's what it really does. It really seals the deal for how these lines are connected, because they were going at it for a while with this. They were really looking. Many people will probably already know that this line would be something of interest, I think, to consider. So they connected it. You can see right there, just to show a nice picture of it. And I think it's interesting too, because this is some very deep history. Indeed, this is a very deep history, indeed. So this, you can kind of tell that's that skull you're just talking about and everything. So they just talk about that pretty much. They know that the people had connections to here, and made their way. Let me go to this map here and see if that makes sense. Yeah, because we remember we had found out. Let me just clear this map real fast. Remember, I was pointing out that the earliest groups would have left out from here, right? And if they left out from here, let me just use a color here, maybe this one. So if they left out from here, they would have went out, and it looks like they would have went and dwelled in this area, right? Developing in these kind of areas, and then going upwards and moving out still, following the coast and going throughout these lands. So it seems that they would have basically went through the coast and went through these lands and settled over here. So they would, and remember, this part of the land was different. So this part of the land right here was different before. We would have had a bridge there. So it would have really gave like maybe it would have not looked so far away and everything. And this area most likely was different too. So it's important to know that they would have had a interesting way of movement. There's also understandings the waters. A certain waters over here is different, but I'm not gonna talk about it right now. So it looks like this line would have basically did one of these. It would have basically came out and basically swept across these lands, went over here, and then dwelled over here these lands. So it would have filled all these areas. So it would have made an undersweep right there. And you know what's interesting? That looks almost like the Indo-European language bend, because it does a undersweep here. Like it does kind of like an undersweep, and we know that this line is also connected to the above area. I just need to look at a visual real fast, because it looks like it looks like Indo-European language area. Try that. Let's see. Yeah. So look at a map real fast. Yeah. Yeah, that looks exactly like what I was thinking. It looks like they would have swept around, and we know that there was a, because I was wondering about what's up with those gaps. They kind of look familiar, and then it seemed like they kept on going, and they would have became a whole different a totally different branch from the distance, separate from these ones that would have been early over here. As we know, they would have had connections over here, so that would have made sense for the movements of those early linguistics in the separation of those families, because as the scripture talks about, as he divided, the people divided, and the people basically settled in Syria. So that definitely makes sense why the areas over there are Indo-European, to get a good understanding that it would have fast. That's kind of interesting. Even when we look at the ancient languages over there, that would have made a lot of sense. So we can see this area would have been filled over here, and obviously the other upper areas of the Indo-European areas. So it would look like what it was seen to me to be a very Indo-European lineage. That definitely makes sense. But we got to note those monophylactic families. That's one thing that a lot of geneticists or people forget is IJK makes all these groups, right? IJK makes the whole family here. And that's what we're seeing here. So it swept down, right? And then it would have swept across these coasts. And I was wondering that too. I was like, why is this area up here so empty? like that area's over there kind of empty. It must be something more modern that's going on in these areas because we know that's where Russia later fills up. So that's kind of what we kind of interested in looking at in modern times. Maybe we can get a look at that because I know a couple lines that I know are Russian, like R1A. Let me just see something real fast. Maybe I can get a look at that line and see. Because it's kind of interesting to consider. Let me just go to this note here. And I'm going to just take a look at the snips of that time. That would just solidify what I'm thinking because it's forcing certain um, thought, but it's you gotta test first before even jumping to any conclusions. You gotta fully test them and prove them to know what's true and whatnot. Let me just take this right here. So, like I said, the CF lineage is an ultimate node that makes a lot of different lineages. We can even look on a SNP tracker. And if we go to CF, if we look at these lines, oh, this one's grabbing me U5. Let me go back right up here. If we look at the Y tree, and if we was to take this lineage, CFP143, and let's say if we put it on a Y, because you know, a lot of people will look at this one, but the ultimate node that makes a family. And I'm just gonna basically check it out. This one, let me actually go to there's a little, I gotta go a little more into the CT SNPs and put that one on there so we can look at. All right, so this is the, go over here, that's the DE line, but here is the CT line right there. So we know that it's gonna obviously have its CF lineages and everything. I'm just gonna check it out real fast and see if I can pull up something. It's just gonna take a bit because I know it's got a lot of stuff in this one. Well, actually, I'm gonna look at CF. So let's get a little more closer to CF. So let me just go to this SNP tracker real fast, because I want to make sure I open that up. All right, so obviously he's gonna make one ultimate family. And if we look at this descendants, should be massive. So let me just look at these dots here. Let me see if there's any uncertainties. All right. I'm gonna put pretty much everything on this before I zoom in on it. No, I'll put the path. All right. I think this is very interesting. Let's see. So obviously this area is just all field. We know this area is just all field, just all in the map. There's no doubt of that. But this is the area that I wanted to look at here. So it seems definitely these areas that would be the most filled would have some early SNPs over here and everything. definitely would still have some early snips going out, then stopping about here for those earlier snips. Looks like there's still some ones up there, but mostly over here. This is would be the basically hotspot of it, and that's why I spoke about that. They would have been basically in the center area when they would have broke out. So we could see in this area they would have basically developed, and we see going back over here, we can see that they would have developed over here, and the ones that also would have developed over here would have still branched out, going out this way. And it seems like they would have settled throughout going out to these different areas. Still would have got some early snips over here, settling over here in these different areas. Look like they would have checked the land and everything and kind of make a drift off. Let me see if I can move this. Looks like they reach, from what it looks like, the early snips, these purple ones, right? They reach going outwards this way. So that one's still continuing on. And you can still see bunches of them in these areas here. So it's kind of like a shoot off, an early shoot off that's basically taken off very early on and settle in these different areas going throughout this area. And it seems like they would all be related. And this shoot off here is very large, and this shoot off here is very early as well. So it's just like the Indo-European bend, and we know because it's this little land bridge right here, and this desert, and these like different areas would have added a gap to this area. But it looks like they would have had some that settled here later on. Looks like about, probably be interesting to look into the Mesolithic time frame of over there. So it looks about Mesolithic time frame. They started to settle a lot in the area, but not after that. Looks like Mesolithic to Bronze Age, and then after that, not so much. Um, if he was to ask me, based upon these ancient snips and everything, so found these things to kind of give us secrets a little bit. So you can see ancient lines would have been upwards, going around this little land bridge right here, and then ancient lines went underneath, going up. And then later on, as some settled here, it looks like they kind of migrated here. So some settled here, as you see, a lot of blue there, a lot of blue right in this area. So they would have went as these purples go. The snips would have had slowly settled in about this area here. And early on, this is when they progressed, moving across these regions here, going into these areas. But that wouldn't happen in the Mesolithic time frame. Seems like early on, as some kept reaching and going to these areas, even up here, right up here, they still go out. So this line would have definitely reached to the other side. So I wanted to see if tracker would show, because we do see them going down, curving around the center area, and going upwards. So it's very interesting how it matches exactly what we see in the Indo-European languages. Because remember, God's the one that spread the linguistics and everything. He's the one that spread the linguistics. He separated the groups by linguistics. All right, so let's see here. So this should be a CF branch. And it's going to take a little bit because I know it's large. So I'll let that open up. So very, very, very interesting for that one. I think it's very, very interesting to take a note of that ultimate movement of that, to really see what's going on there. Let's go to another node. Let's go to the next node after that, which is actually going to be a interesting one, which I'll point to where it is here, because it's kind of interesting. So I'll leave it alone. I wanted to make this short, but it's just interesting to me that without a doubt that things are connected. All these lines, all these connected. So you can see how it, even right here, you can see how it bends around, how the cultures bend around this area. So you can see how they basically have ancient ones. There's the one that they were looking at with the star, and it bends around these areas here. Not that much much in the middle, not that much in the middle over here. Like we've seen with the early ones, not much in the middle. They are bend around. There's the oldest one. That's Isham, UST Isham, and that's the one I was making a theory that every single, almost all those SNPs came from that Isham, and that it will ultimately trace to IJK. And you can see it will branch off. You can see obviously these will be later branches. This one seems early as well. These ones, right? But not as early as Isham. This one's very early. That one I've never seen. That's very early. I'll probably look into that a little later. See what's going on with that. What is that? Or what haplogroup is that? It looks like these are modern humans. So again, like I said, careful with those layers and everything. But it's very, very interesting to note it. So here's what that line they was talking about. They got it from an early, looks like an M line. Looks like an early M, or unless they're talking about one of these ones. It's definitely important when noting. Look at the little zoom in. Let's see if they got the stars sample here. There it is. Looks like it's got their ancient samples there. Looks like it will be over here. Actually, that won't be a M9 for the red right there. And then you'll see it here. And that's the one right there. Looks like from the Isham, just like we've seen. And because Isham has a R, I don't know why they don't put the R on here. Isham has a R star, and that's a ultimate root, an R star female lineage. R star female lineage. So, they try to say is coming from that line. That one, not so much because you can see a root there. They know that Isham doesn't. They know that this is important. They know that L lines don't actually make some of the female lines that they were trying to conclude before. You'll start noticing that if you pay attention to modern genetic papers. Look at that root right there. That's called a root. That's a root, and there's a split. So why is Isham at the root and not actually coming from the what they call the African lines? That's because that's not how it works. But we know the lines that they try to connect it with is not even African. So you gotta be careful with those things. A lot of them are modern, not as old as even the Isham line, which is the root. I got a paper that says that actually the female lineages line comes from that root, that R star. I got a paper that says the female lineages line actually come from that root line. That's why I look at that female line coming from that Isham. That's a root. You ask any geneticist, that's a root. You can see. So obviously this is very, very, very interesting, I would say. So definitely has some connections. This one definitely has connections with these ones. So they're all under this M branch. So they're going to be underneath this M branch. So that one that they found is under M. So that's very interesting to see. So M female branches. Let's see what they got real fast over here. What's going on there? It looks like they connected some that reach all the way over here. But looks like these going to be the mtDNA of these groups and everything. mtDNA gets very old. It's very interesting how mtDNA is. It really got some very, very high ages. But makes sense because, you think about it, Ham, Shem, and Japheth would have been recent, but the female lineage just went all the way back to Cain and Abel and Seth. So there's no bottleneck in the females line. Very, very interesting. So just they just know which ones are connected and stuff. Paleocene America, same as modern America, and other ones is there. About the same. This one I'll leave on. Just looking to see what's going on here. All right. That's very interesting stuff. So it's just a paper that kind of for those that's looking into the ancient Americas and everything, because it's one of those lands that you don't see a lot of information for. They don't really give a lot of information for, but there's some interesting secrets in it. But this just ties it all together that pretty much the best way to understand it is that everyone would ultimately trace all the way back to the Levant, to the areas of Ararat, a little above that, right? A little above the Levant. So above the Levant, above Mesopotamia, but settling in those areas. So very interesting stuff. All right, close that. So just to summarize that, what we was looking at. So I just wanted to show that. That's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to show that interesting find because I thought that was very interesting because it connects a massive group of a lineage and even certain linguistics that we know would have an early connection. So it makes perfect sense. It matches exactly what we see, that we see groups that left that settled down here, and then we seen groups that would went and settled in the upper area. So it makes perfect sense for what we should note with these migrations. So there will be a lot of information in those things. Someone going into those things, obviously, there will be a lot of information in those things, definitely because of the truth. But I just wanted to show you that's what this map right here. This map is fossils of BC time before, but right before Abraham. All this is BC time, right before Abraham, right before Abraham. So very, very, very important stuff. So BC time, right before Abraham, very important stuff that basically sets an important understanding of these things. Very, very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So major connections makes perfect sense to what we're seeing based on the biblical text and based on linguistics and based on fossils and genetics. So very interesting study. So I like that. If anyone has any questions for our close, let me know. Otherwise, I have. Maybe we can look at some snips or something. I'm off today, so I'm not in no rush. No rush today. As Somali, E1B1B, amen. As a Somali with E1B1B, as you say, we are Shem. What does that mean for us from a biblical standpoint? So, as a son of Shem, or as a son of Ham, or as a son of Japheth, as a daughter of Eve, we are all just, what it does is brings us in the biblical story. It lets us know that we are his creation, is where we came from, is from his hands. We are the work of his hands. We are the order of his structure, right? So that's something to know, that we ourselves are part of the evidence of God, that we ourselves, by our living or in our death, we are counted as something that existed, created from God, belonging to God, and being of God. So that's very important. So, and that's why the message is written for those who hear it. So I guess the truth of that is that you having that lineage and connecting it to who you are, that's what it means, that you are evidence of yourself, of the biblical text, right? It gets deeper than that though, but that's the best summary to what that question is, right? What does it mean for that? Can you find which tribe the Siberian Nigeria? That that is a great idea. That is a great idea. That D0, that is a great idea. That is a great idea. Let's look at the D snips real fast. Modern D0, or what they call D0. Let me see if this thing has it on there. D0, because D0 is actually D2. D0 is actually D2, but probably be interesting to look into the modern snips real fast to get a little idea. I never thought of that. And that's why I have a holy conversation, because you might think of things you might not have thought about. That's a good idea. At the D group and its snips. Let me see if I can find that one. All right, here it is. All right, so here's some D snips and everything. and they got some interesting fossils of some interesting finds and some interesting places and everything right here. So nothing. Let me see with these. These are all D1. So D1 we need D2. D1's not what we want. Just looking to see. We can look at that root one. We'll look at that root one. We need D2. We'll look at this one. Because this one would be kind of like a root one. And that's right here. That's a very early one. So D0, there's a lot of questions in that group and stuff. You can see obviously the D group, the DE group, right? D and E actually started together, right? Remember the E group we verified as the ancient Natufian group, and the D group, which is his brother, his closest relative, the DE Yap group, actually would be this far lineage over here. And we can note its family, its descendants, and we can see with this group, we have some connections basically going out over here. I'm sure that's probably connections to Japan over there. And then settling in these areas. Looks like they settle over here some to these little mountain areas here. Looks like they settle over here and over here. So it's something that's very important to note on that. But let's see if we can find. Let's see if we can find it. Let me try that real fast and see if we can find D2. That's kind of interesting. It's an interesting dot to look at that snip real fast. So the D lineage, it also talks about the D1 and everything. So you can see it's going to have these early snips and everything, and they divide and become these different lineages. But the one we're talking about is this one down here, D2. D2 is actually going to be kind of interesting. It doesn't have a page, so it's kind of interesting to get a look at, to get an idea of what's going on there. So D2 or D0, just to point that out, I'll go to where the snips are. They just talk about what they found and everything. But this is a long time ago. We know that the fossils are actually outside of Africa, but let me go to it here. See if I can just find it real fast. Let me see what's the name of it. I want to find out what's the exact snip. Not this. Let's see. So they say, I'm sure that it has to have another name for it. All right, let's see, where is it? Because I want to find it, okay, here it is. We found one. Looks like they have a couple snips. I'm just going to copy a few. This is going to just take me right to it so I can get to some pinpoints of it. Nope. Yeah, this one, let me see if I can. I'm sure that he doesn't have those snips. And let's see if this has it. But we did see that, they found some in what looks like, Syria, right? Saudi Arabia, and a couple different places and whatnot. This one wouldn't be African, but it would be closer to Africa, like Syria and places like that around the lands of the Levant and stuff, right? This one. So very, very, very interesting. So very, very interesting to know that one is going to have it in them. So let me just see if I can find it real fast. I'm sure it probably has a certain name. I'm sure they changed the name to it. That's the thing about it. I never got his little scientific name, but here it says this branch. Let's see if I can find it. All right, looks like we got something. So, looks like it would have been a branch that would have settled right here in Arabia. So it would have been a branch that would have been mostly over here, and it would have been that probably that one that settled close to here and then popped up in Arabia. So we can see that this branch, right, turn off his descendants. They say it would have been around about over here to about this area. Let's see if I can find it on Y tree. Let's see if I can find it on Y tree. Unfortunately, this thing didn't load, but I'm sure it would have it on there. But I want to see if I can find this branch on Y tree. I'll just look on let's just look on Y tree. Let's see if we can find this one or something. Oops. We just need to switch to classic. Okay. Let's go and see if we can find this one. We got to go to the D group. And that looks like, I don't know why I went down there. All right, right here. And let's see if I can find it here. Looks like it's going to be a little hard to find than I thought. I don't know what code they put. I'm going to have to look. Let me look and see what is called. Unless you know it already. What's the code for the S O D G? Let's see if we can find it. Yeah, let's see. And let's see if I can find one of these ones. If I find one of these, then maybe we can point out something on it. Because I haven't seen much talk on it either. Yeah, maybe it's. I'm feeling like they didn't really put much on that tree. That's what it looks like. Either they need to update it or, you know. Let's try again. Let's see. I don't know. Let's see if it's this one. No, that's obviously dope. I don't know why I'm looking at that. So it would have been basically a snip. Let me just look at it because I probably could find it manually. Let's see if it's this long stem down here. No. Though, this one looks. I need to know if this is. Let's see if I can find this one. This might be D2. This might be D2. Let me see if it is. Yeah, isn't that interesting? I want to know if it's D2. It might be because it's a different snip. It's a different snip than this one. Probably just don't have a name for it yet, but that's probably what it is. And it looks like it has a nice amount of mutations. I'm surprised I don't have the one for it. But it would be, see, D1 and D2 split, right? Basically, this is what it would look like. So you have these two descendants, right? You have these two descendants right here, and this one was split. Let's see if I can find this descendant. Let's see if I can just find this descendant. And I can go into like the root of it and open it up. Yeah. They make this one. This one, I didn't even, never tried to look for it. They made this one challenging. So I'll probably look into it a little later and see what's up with that. Because this one is the one we were just talking about right here. So we just talk about this one, with its descendants going to the Middle East, right? To the area of Middle East. But it looks like there's a few information of that one. And it doesn't even look like they have a branch on the tree for it yet. But unless it's hidden somewhere on here in some type of code. So, but that's that one. Even if you click on here, this don't have a page for it. So I can tell your frustration with that one. It's one of those ones that is very like that. It has lineages in Arabia. We know it has lineages in other places. So I guess that's the best way to put it. Is that it will be Arabian lineage. The best way to find it is this snip. This you can use this snip or this snip. D-FT75. So that would be D2. This right here is D2, which they call D0. That's what they call D0. But it's Arabian lineage that some later on modern day time went into Africa. But that's a late nip. It's so late that they didn't even include it on the early ones, whatnot. So it's a late snip. Means it enters to that area later on, but still is found in Arabia and certain other places around. That's kind of important. But it'll be obviously a relative to these early Japanese and Asian lineages that had split. I guess to give an answer for that, for as much detail as I can get for it, um, until I maybe look into it a little more into what's going on with it. But based on what we already have of it, we know it's Arabian. It's found in Saudi Arabia, and we know it's going to be found in areas of Africa, and we know that it's going to be found in places of America, and those are still going to be modern. But those are always important to get an idea of that we find it in Arabia. And even the snip tracker shows being over here in the areas of India, at the corner over here of the Himalayas, and then settle in deep areas of Arabia. So that makes perfect sense for that line, that haplogroup. I hope I gave you something more than maybe what you have. Would you agree that Y-DNA I1 is the father of the Noide race? Yes, I definitely agree. I was just looking into that the other day. I was doing a lot. I was watching some documentaries of the Vikings, and I was getting a good understanding of that, because you get a good understanding when you look into the Vikings. Like, here's this thing is nice because it has some preset things. Like, here's one for the Vikings, and I'm gonna just remove his descendants, and it connects some interesting lineages. And we have I right here, and you know what happens is in this little area here. Let me see if I can grab a map here. Is in this little area here where a lot of the, as you can see, there's almost like a cross zone. And this little area, there's a lot of transactions that happen here. But something happens where they kind of settle and they get into it with these ones and everything. And that's why you get the stuff that's going on with the Vikings, with things that's happening in these little area where they're selling around. So they're like the boats going around, selling around, invading each other and whatnot. But definitely, I do believe that that's what they would be. They would be that ancient line. I think they would be that group. But there are some mixed groups in it, like this one. So Q group, there's a Q group that goes into it. This is gonna be a still connection to the Nordic groups and whatnot, Noide groups. But this is a group that comes in too. But remember, they all are connected with that IJK group. So if we put IJK, we'll see an interesting connection. But this is a descendant that's had settled over here as well, and it seems that they had, because that's probably why there was so many fights over there, because you got all these different descendants with different families and different problems and different connections, and they're basically getting into it in those areas. So I definitely agree with that, because that's something that we do see. It's definitely something that we do see, and that would definitely make a lot of sense. For example, here is exactly the one I1 Normans. So they will be more the dominant one over here. Turn off this right here so you can see. We also find the fossils of them as well. Just to point out one. Maybe we can grab one real fast. Let this refresh or load. Let me just type it down right here. All right, so some Nordic lineages. I'll go to one here. I'll go to the oldest one. Just grab one over here real fast just to point it out. Let that load in. All right, this one, and it would be I group. So that would be the oldest Nordic lineage. It'll be your oldest Nordic, and it's with a U5A. So it has a connection to the U5A lineage, and it will be Nordic. Looks like a couple different female lineages were Nordic with U5A. So U5A will probably be that early Nordic lineage, definitely in the Mesolithic time frame. So we can see it in the Norway. So you can see right here, right in that area where we suspect it to be, we can have a I group, and just to point out this exact snip. See, you can see right there, just like we've seen with the one that's the Nordic one. Indeed, that's the same thing. So we can see that would be indeed the same family. So you can see descendants, they would have spread to these areas. So you can see some connection to these areas over here. And we can see over here, if we show its descendants, you can see the same thing. So you can see they would have filled over here in these little areas. So we can see a good area of basically covering. So that all that makes sense. That makes sense. So Nordic it has some interesting mixed groups, but that's what we see. And we also know that I group settled in, like I said, it became Irish. It became, like we said, the Vikings and the ones of the Normads, some different ones of the Isles and everything. The Isles of Men, and the Vikings. So a lot of sea areas that we were seeing, that we was noting in certain areas. So definitely that one is going to be Normatic, definitely. So that will be one that would come from the same branch of IJK, and it would be Normatic. That is true. That is true. And answer that real fast. What other African tribes got D0? Most likely none. Most likely that was a rare find. That was only like 3 people they found of modern people. There was no ancient group. There was no large group. It was isolated groups of like 3 Nigerian men who took the test, and they basically found them among them, which is basically the same equivalent of finding a. Let me show you something real fast. There was a basically a very interesting event that happened that I saved. If you know about Pompeii, Pompeii was a very busy city. It was in the lands of Europe, and Pompeii had a pretty much a volcano, but they found interesting haplogroups amongst them that someone probably went put in there when they're thinking about Pompeii. So just this year, 2022, they found a fossil of individuals in 79 AD, and they found out that these groups actually would have some interested lineages. So these would be in the area of Italy. So they found there, let me just show you the highlight. The lineage that they found there was some mtDNA H groups. So that's commonly known, those Indo-European lineages. We should expect the Indo-European lineage to be like that in the area of Sardinia and areas of Italy. But we also found an individual with mtDNA. Now, if you're familiar with mtDNA, that's a said mainly African lineage. So it says individual A, right? It said was found to belong to Y chromosome lineage A-M13, and that's a lineage that's an ancient. That line is actually an ancient Egyptian. That line is actually an ancient Egyptian line, right? So a rare lineage absent among ancient individuals from basically from the areas of the Italian peninsula, right? From areas of Italy. So it's saying obviously it wouldn't be there because they would say it's mainly found in Africa. So it's the same equivalent like that. Like find a D group down there is the same equivalent of finding an A group in 79 AD. So it's the same thing like that. The populations would have been moving around amongst each other. The world in a mist time wasn't like how people might think, that they were so segregated and separate. So right here, you see obviously that would have a large portion in Africa, 40%, but which known occurrences much lower frequencies. It says it also, this is what we were talking about, how the A group also is found in where? In the Near East, Turkey, right? Because remember, Turkey had those Hamitic lineages there, right? You think about the original Hittites, this is the lineage we were saying, A and B are the original Hittites. So Turkey, Yemen, Egypt, Palestine, Jordan, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, and the Mediterranean islands of Sardinia and Cyprus and Lesbos. Lesbos, probably said that weird, Lesbos. But you can see right here, very, very important to know, this is going to be a set of African lineage pops up in a certain area of what it seems like Pompeii. So very, very interesting stuff that was refined. So I guess that's one way to look at that D group that was just found in those three people is the same thing like finding the A group found in Italy. It just happens. Someone pops up in a place. Doesn't mean that they developed there. That just means that's where we found them within that time frame, right? Because origin, you'll have to look at Mesolithic and Paleolithic if you want to establish origin. So we don't establish origin in the Middle Age, right? And definitely not in our modern time. We don't establish something of origin in our modern time. We establish by fossils where we were a long time ago. But that's an example. That's an example for that one. D group was there. Shalom. Nothing much today. So I'm gonna quickly summarize what we just touched on today. What we just touched on. So I just wanted to talk about. I must have closed it. Let me open up real fast. I want to talk about the find that just came out today. It just came today, right? Let's see where it is. Is it right here? Right? It just came out today, right? Ancient DNA to evidence for Native American East Asian ancestry. So very, very important, very, very interesting stuff where they talk about that this line was found and it connects lines of people from America, right? It's got the roots of the female lineages from Americas, connecting all the female lineages from Brazil to Americas to China, showing that everyone in the world is basically from one ultimate source. So all modern people, just like the biblical narrative says, got off at one point and all of a sudden it filled up the earth and being a modern group of people. A modern group of people, and every single person is the same person, that we actually come from the same roots. We all one family, pretty much, connected together and, separate by, different aspects of life, right? What they say, we're like 99.9% different, but those tiny 0.0000 point differences is this what we're looking at. We're looking at those tiny, tiny, tiny differences that seem just like, if you ever seen with little things, right? Like a balloon, right? One difference in a balloon, one crack in the hole changes everything, right? Little differences, little differences. So that's what we see, just these little differences, but it establishes foundations. So very interesting foundations they can establish. So, and we wanted to show that even the map that we made, let me see, let me just reset this real fast. Even the map that we made illustrates what we're actually seeing, that we're actually seeing that people would have started over here and went out and they would have went in these areas and they would have settled over here. So they would have started in the center area over here, right in the center area. They would have went out into these areas and they would have kept working their way until they got over here and they would have went out and they would have settled in these areas. And they're all genetically connected to one ultimate Adam, right? Genetic Adam, a genetic Eve. And there's an early let me make sure I close these. And then we talked about some other things. Let me just close some of these that we don't need now. All right. So we just talked about a couple different things that obviously make important points to understand. And we had edited the map that we basically confirmed fossils up to the oldest fossils we can possibly find until Abraham, right? At the cutoff of about 2C, going on to 1900, 17, all those things. But we stopped about there and we put all on one map. And the map makes perfect sense for what we see for human origins, for the whole world. It's giving us the ultimate knowledge of these things. But I want to put one more thing on the map. I want to make sure I put this on the map because I want to make a point here. I want to make a point here that people didn't start in Africa, and the lineages that they said were oldest in Africa aren't even the oldest in Africa. So that's very important to understand that we got to be careful with what we call African. For example, there's a group E1A that they say is African. The oldest ones we can find in certain areas, they're not that old, but there's an older line that we know is Indo-European, but it's going to be found in areas of what is the later Neolithic time frame. So in the late Neolithic time frame, we can see about almost 6,000 years ago, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, based on their scaling. But remember, these are based on their layers, so give or take. This one is actually considered to be one of the oldest T groups, one of the oldest T groups that will be in Africa. The reason why it's important because I want to map it. It's very important to understand. This is going to be the paper where they got that line from the T that they found in the Morocco area. So they're just basically connecting other groups that would be moving from the Natufian area and whatnot. So I talked about this before with the Eurasians and the E groups that settled over there from the Natufian movements and whatnot. We also talk about the T of the Gasulians moving over there. But this one, as you can see, is not in the Paleocene or it's not the Paleocene or the Mesolithic or the Neolithic, but it's going to be right here on the transition of late Neolithic Bronze Age. So late Neolithic Bronze Age, that's going to be like a 3 on this thing. And remember, on this little design we were doing, is that the yellow represents the lines that we found to be Japheth. And we're actually going to add one on here real fast, right over here in the areas of Morocco, because this T right here is actually, it needs to be added to this area. So it's actually down in this little corner here, right over here. But I'm gonna make it solid right here. So right there. And we're gonna put it as a 3 because that one is a very old line. Let me just switch it So just so it's seen as I update this map, just to put this on here, because remember, this is just like a little summary. All right. So I just wanted to show that and do that so I can save it as what we was basically going over. So I'll make sure that that's basically something that is going to be uh, saved and updated. And I'll put it on the BT. That's where it's at. If you want to share this note, this picture, right? If you've seen us do this, we did it for a couple hours and we verified every fossil on here. And it will tell you the story of creation. It'll tell you the story of how things were set up before Abraham came in, right? It'll show you what the world looked like before he came in. So I'm talking doing a lot of history, doing a lot of studies on history, a lot of studies on these genetics and everything. And this is what we're seeing. That the whole world that we live in, right? The whole world that we're in is breathing the creation that was illustrated the Most High. So as you can see, this map will be in the description and the BT note. So that one right here, that's going to be early Neolithic or late Neolithic, is earlier than your Mota. So that one over there is earlier than your Mota. Also, we knew that there was some other groups that were here early on as well. So that's just something to consider, that some of these lines that may seem like they're different than other lines, they're even older than the ones that they were trying to say were only African. So that's something to consider when going over these things, right? The out of Africa concept is not true, but the biblical concept, the biblical truth is the only truth. So with that, family, be blessed, be beloved,